If we want to find out whether or not an increasing Muslim population poses a threat to a Western, secular society, and if yes, how big of a threat, we need to gather some information on the subject. I've got my personal experiences and biases, sure, but those are hardly a solid basis. There are more and more news reports about sexual crimes and violent crimes in general committed by migrants from Muslim countries as well as refugees, some of which had been unprecedented up until very recently. And I fully admit that stories like these worry me, even if I don't want to submit myself to fear-mongering. As an atheist, I have an axe to grind with any religious ideology, and the more seriously said ideology is taken by its followers, the bigger my axe becomes. Christian churches and the state are more intertwined in Germany than I would like, but as long as I don't work in a Catholic hospital, that fact doesn't take away my personal freedoms. The majority of the already decreasing number of Christians in this country are secular above all else, and you hardly ever see them pushing for censorship, blasphemy laws, let alone imprisonment or murder on the basis of their beliefs. Yes, some of them sue Satire magazines, but they do this unsuccessfully most of the time, and above all else, they don't resort to or even threaten violence. And the general public, more specifically the left, doesn't grant them some sort of patronizing victim status. It's a non-issue as far as its impact on the freedom of expression in our society is concerned. But we do see Islamic institutions pushing for extra privileges. We do occasionally see German courts consulting Sharia scholars when deciding on how to deal with divorce and inheritance cases amongst Muslims. And above all else, we do see them silently as well as actively condoned by the politically correct and thus de facto amoral mainstream. The same people that would yell, "You bigots," at a Catholic family that doesn't want to see a gay pride parade in their neighborhood, the same people that will call some retired construction worker a racist for saying he's uncomfortable with a particular ethnic or religious group, or demand him to be fired if he's still working, are going to cuddle and protect the same sort of people when they happen to have a migrant background or happen to be fleeing or uneducated. Although I'm painting with a rather broad brush here, this is by no means a strawman. Look at the retardation of political discourse that we are currently witnessing in this country. Look at how the wrong thinkers are losing their jobs, are being character assassinated and emotionally blackmailed, how they are in fact dehumanized. Look at what the standard of political conversation both within large parts of the media as well as in public has sunken to. This level of dishonesty and pure lack of curiosity has almost become the standard among people on all sides of the political aisle. Maybe it always has been this way, and I simply didn't see it up until a couple of years ago, but this is the sad state of affairs. And maybe it isn't the standard at all, but the sane voices are being drowned in a flood of tweets, Facebook posts and newspaper comments that are more and more indistinguishable from actual articles. Whatever the case may be, I don't intend to be just another ideologue having an emotional debate about what has to be and what mustn't be the case. So I did some research and I want to share the results with you. The numbers and stats that I'll be referencing have been collected in Germany for the most part. It's a case study and may not be representative of Muslim minorities everywhere. I'm going to discuss crime stats, prejudices and anti-Semitism, which I think serves as a lackmus test of sorts when you want to know how much of an issue baseless racial/religious prejudices are within a population, and political preferences. I'm trying to be nuanced in my approach because I think that's generally a good thing as long as nuance doesn't prevent you from coming to a conclusion. Which is a problem that I see many YouTubers who aspire to be fair when they discuss a sensitive issue like this struggling with. So let's get ready for the ride. Crime stats. Data on this is basically non-existent in Germany, for the general public at least. According to the 2012 Federal Police Report, which is the latest I could find, 1/4 of all crimes have been committed by non-German suspects. If you get rid of foreigner-specific crimes such as entering or staying in the country illegally, it's 21.5%. Now, the police reports don't go into further detail on the suspects, which means that we can't say how many of the other crimes are committed by citizens that have migrated to Germany themselves and where they or their parents have migrated from. However, there is no doubt that migrants commit a disproportionate number of crimes. This is an undenied truth, even amongst the very politicians that are carelessly opening the borders right now.
Aber wir müssen akzeptieren, dass die Zahl der Straftaten bei jugendlichen Migranten besonders hoch ist. Deshalb ist das Thema Integration eng verbunden auch mit der Frage der Gewaltprävention in allen Bereichen unserer Gesellschaft.
I looked up the police reports in my hometown of Kiel recently, and in roughly half of the violent crimes, break-ins, robberies, thefts committed, the suspects were described as looking or sounding non-German. That was before my local newspaper published an article alleging that the local police department tried to hide refugee-related crimes, which is a notion that I can anecdotally attest to. I know police people who told me about half a year ago that they were witnessing a significant increase in crime committed by refugees and were told by their superiors not to discuss this with their family members, let alone the press. That's one of the reasons why I've become rather wary in regard to official police publications. Priorities and prejudices. A 2008 telephone survey conducted amongst more than 9,000 participants in Germany, France, the Netherlands and Austria came to the following results. Close to 20% of Christians agreed that there is only one true interpretation of their scripture, compared to more than 70% of surveyed Muslims. And a bit more than 10% of Christians considered their religious rules to be more important than secular laws, compared to over 60% of Muslims. About 10% of Christians didn't want homosexual friends, compared to over 50% of Muslims. Less than 10% of Christians didn't trust Jews, compared to more than 40% of Muslims. And while a bit over 20% of Christians believed that Muslims want to destroy Western civilization, the percentage of Muslims that believed the opposite to be true was a bit higher than 50%. Let's stay with the topic of anti-Semitism amongst Muslims in Germany. This incomplete account of publicly known anti-Semitic attacks shows already that anti-Semitism has a problematic magnitude amongst young people with Muslim backgrounds. This study is referring to news stories that have been mentioned previously and are the only source on this topic because statistics are based on out-of-date categories. Anti-Semitic violence is only divided into perpetrator groups right-wing, left-wing, foreign, and others. There is no information on religious background. So again, not only is a religious background not taken into account at all when anti-Semitic attacks are concerned, there is no way of knowing if and what migrant background the perpetrators had. For example, would a Palestinian German criminal who sympathizes with Hamas count as right-wing and a PLO sympathizing one back in the day as left-wing? Here's an abstract of a 2010 study on the subject of anti-Semitism among young people. With Muslim youths, a noticeable Israel-related, religiously legitimized and classical anti-Semitism has been found. About 1 in 4 youths from Arabic background agreed that in my religion it's Jews which are bringing ill into the world. The rate of classical anti-Semitism is even higher. 35.8% of young Arabs and 20.9% of young Turks agreed that Jews have too much influence in the world. Among young people without a migrant background, the rate was only 2.1%. I'm currently doing some research on the connection between Islam and Jew hatred, but I can already tell you that there is a clear connection that sets Islamic hatred of Jews apart from the widespread Jew hatred that we've seen throughout the history of Christianity. Political preferences. One important question, if you want to know about the political tendencies of Muslims in Germany, is who do they vote for? I'll be talking about Turks here, who are the largest Muslim minority in Germany today, and there is exactly one study on that topic. This study has been conducted via telephone shortly after the federal elections in 2013 by Professor Erdoğan of the University of Migration and Politics in Ankara, Turkey. The sample size of 2,244 people is hardly representative of almost 2 million Turks in Germany, so take it with a grain of salt. According to this study, 64% of Turks voted for the Social Democratic Party and another 24% voted for other left-leaning parties in the federal election of 2013. The conservative Christian Democratic Party got 7% of Turkish vote. This is hardly surprising, as the majority of Turks have migrated to Germany as unlearned laborers and thus lean towards the traditional Workers' Party. Nevertheless, the left-leaning parties are the ones that have been pushing for ideas such as gender equality, gay acceptance and other issues that aren't too popular with many conservative-leaning voters. And the superficially Christian icing of the CDU might very well have deterred Turks from voting for them. 58% of the participants would have voted for the Turkish Conservative Party after all. To quote the study, Turks in Germany tend to act rationally in regard to German elections, while the decision regarding Turkey is primarily guided by ideology, faith and emotions. So it stands to reason that the majority of German Turks would in fact vote for a conservative party if it had an Islamic foundation rather than a Christian one. The likelihood of such a party to become a relevant consideration for German Muslims may of course increase the larger the Muslim population gets. So what now? As I've shown, there are risks connected to a significantly rising Muslim population. We need to be wary about regressive ideas gaining more and more traction within our society because we failed to a large degree in our attempts to integrate and assimilate people. As long as we haven't figured out how to do a better job at that, I think it's dangerous not to limit the number of Muslims that are coming here. We owe this to women in our society, we owe it to sexual minorities, we owe it to free thinkers, and we owe it to religious as well as ethnic minorities. We owe it to everybody. I believe that we can be confident that our model of democracy, in spite of all its imperfections and a definite room for improvement here and there, is an appealing model to people from all over the world, which is one of the reasons why they are voting with their feet and coming here. German welfare programs contribute to that decision as well, I'm not going to deny that. And whether or not that needs to be changed in order to not create wrong motivations for coming to Germany is a question that is already being discussed in German politics. The nimbus of a taboo is fading away on that one at least. There are going to be a lot of people to whom this country may not look as appealing anymore as it has before once they have gotten used to living in peace and realize that life on welfare or the lower income end isn't as attractive as it may have seemed to be in the first place. And this will reduce the number of people who claim to be refugees significantly. It makes it easier for us to help the people that are actually fleeing civil wars and religious or ethnic persecution. Nevertheless, we will have to deal with the outcome of the current wave of migrants from the Muslim world, as well as waves of refugees that are yet to come. That's why choosing not to vet at all or claiming that no human is illegal isn't a viable option. If we followed that principle ad absurdum, it would mean that no matter how many people want to come to our country, we have no right at all to turn them away. Sure, as long as places like Syria aren't safe, there's nowhere else to send them to once they got here and have been granted asylum. Whether you like it or not, we are pretty much stuck with them. But I do think that it's necessary, vitally important in fact, to reduce the number of Muslims that are coming to this country in the long run. And yes, I'm saying Muslims in particular, because it is that exact demographic that tends to be at odds with our concepts of personal freedom. A significant portion of them don't agree with secular principles and our notions of human rights as soon as it doesn't suit them. Sadly, this is a trend that doesn't just fade away 1 or 2 generations later. As long as there is no concept proposed of how to better integrate migrants, how not to make them feel ostracized, how to not let them be bigoted, it's irresponsible to simply allow an unprecedented number of them into our country. It's necessary to have a debate about basic principles that we as a society hold dear and, most importantly, defend and enforce them and be unapologetic about it. We don't only owe this to ourselves and our children, who have a right to grow up in a society that is secular and, well, civilized. We owe it to future generations of immigrants as well. Otherwise, there is nowhere left to flee to.